Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at another episode of my F1 history series that I've been doing on the channel, and today we're looking at aerodynamics and DRS. So we're basically going to be going over the history of aerodynamics, what we have seen in Formula 1 and how it has developed over time, who are the key people involved in the development of aerodynamics and how it has become such an important part of the sport. And of course we'll also look ahead to what we might see in 2026. So first off, we start with what is aerodynamics. Well, basically there are three things that affect aerodynamics as a whole. You have downforce, side forces and drag. So drag, for starters, is the air resistance at the front. So as your car is punching through the air, what is the amount of resistance pushing back against your car, dragging it back? Basically, why slipstreaming is important. If you're wondering, drag is basically cancelled out when you are slipstreaming. The car in front is the one getting the drag and punching a hole in the air for you to then slip behind into that hole and making you a lot faster. Downforce, basically that is the use of the wings and other parts of the car to push air down on top of the car, keeping it lower to the ground. So at certain tracks you may hear the commentators say they're going for a high downforce setup, and that is usually when you are at a Monaco sort of track where you need to be a lot closer to the ground and there's a lot of tight and twisty corners. And then you have tracks like Monza where you don't need as much downforce and you want to be going as quick as possible. So there will be a lower downforce setup. And then side forces is basically the air coming in from the side of the car. So when you're going through corners or something like that, if there's high wind coming at the side of the car, how is it pushing the car either side, and how can you make the most of that air to help you through corners, that sort of stuff. So those are the three sort of things, I guess, you look at when you're talking about aero in Formula 1. I must say I'm not an aero expert, so we're not going to go over a lot of the technicalities of aero, because that's not quite my forte. If you are interested in that, I do have some links in the description to articles which I used to get most of my information around aerodynamics. So first off, in terms of F1, let's talk about the wings, which have now become one of the most important parts of an F1 car. So it all starts with aeroplanes, basically. When you look at an aeroplane, obviously its wings push air over the top of the wings, and that creates sort of a counter resistance underneath the plane, which pushes it up into the air. Now with F1, what they did was took an aeroplane wing, not the same size obviously, but turned it upside down. So now the air is going underneath the wing, which then creates that imbalance once again and pushes the car down further to the ground, creating downforce. So very interesting, and again, a lot more technical than I know about. So if you are interested in that, do check out what I've got in the description. But yeah, basically the wings were created so that air could go underneath them and create more downforce onto the car and give it better air resistance and things like that, and basically help you go a lot faster. In the 1950s, however, we did not have wings. There was not a lot of aerodynamics back then. In the 1950s, cars were a lot more box shaped. They focused a lot more on, how would the engine affect speed, as well as looking at things like tires and how to get the most out of, those sort of things instead of aerodynamics. It wasn't until a little bit later in 1960s where aerodynamics started to become a real focus for Formula 1. And looking at that sort of time period, we now get on to Colin Chapman and Lotus. We talked about this in the last video and the video before. Such a huge moment in the sport. Colin Chapman and Lotus, I personally feel, have had the biggest effect on Formula 1 in terms of their developments and things like that. And unsurprisingly, once again, they were the first team to put wings onto their Formula One car. The first reported use of wings in Formula One I found was 1968 at Monaco, which you can see on the screen now. And Graham Hill got pole in that race and then went on to win the race. And since then, wings have obviously now become a mainstay in Formula One and have become super, super important. And we've seen all sorts of different renditions of wings and trying to get the most out of aerodynamics throughout the years. Even after this, 1975, we saw everyone go with this huge box, obviously, at the top, trying to create that sort of, on the top of a plane. I don't quite know the word for it right now, but try and create that sort of look. And then as we've gone further on, we've seen different designs come into play, and how can teams get the most out of the air around the car to make it as quick as possible while using less engine power, really. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about aerodynamics, is the fact that you can make the car so much quicker by just using the environment around you, by just using the air that is around the car. And one of the big ways the teams have developed over time in this has been the development of wind tunnels. Of course, wind tunnels now are, everywhere. Every team has a wind tunnel. They're always developing their wind tunnels. McLaren recently made their new wind tunnel, finished their new wind tunnel. We can see how much that has affected their performances. Last year they were rock bottom of the championship after 2 races. Absolutely terrible. Get their wind tunnel back up and working, and suddenly you see how good they are now. It is a massive factor in performance, is your aerodynamics, and your wind tunnel, to be able to test it, is a major importance to Formula One teams. Now, what I was talking about earlier in terms of how they use their wings, this is something that's come into Formula One over the last 20, 30 years maybe. How can you change the wings around again to make you better at different tracks? So as we can see on screen, got 2 Mercedes. When you're at Monaco, it's a lot wider, a lot bigger, sort of hooked up almost, to create more downforce, more resistance, pushing the car into the ground. And then when you're at a track like Monza, which is on the right, you can see it's like super flat, because you just want to be flying through the air. You do not want the car to be slowed down at all, because there's so many straights. It's super fast, and that shows the unbelievable development that we've had in this time. Certain people working on it, and how quickly aerodynamics has become quite possibly one of the most important things in Formula One. Moving on now, let's talk about this man, Adrian Newey. 45 years he has been in Formula One now, and he has had such a profound impact on the sport. Newey has pretty much worked with every team possible in Formula One, really. He has been everywhere, Williams, McLaren, and obviously some of his old teams even, some that you may never even heard of. A team called March is where he started, and this is the car that he designed and made. And it does look very similar to a lot of cars that we see now. It has that sort of shape. And this is because that's what he designed all the way back then. And even back then it was a little bit different from what everyone expected. And it really changed the whole dynamic of Formula One. They weren't very good, March. They had a pretty poor engine. And so Adrian Newey, young man at the time, needed to utilise aerodynamics as their advantage against the rest of the field. Newey went on to build this lightweight and compact vehicle. It's extremely small and, like I said, lightweight, so it's not exactly going to stay together very well. And it didn't win any races, but it was such an improvement that people could immediately see the impact that aerodynamics were having, and the impact that Adrian Newey specifically was happening. And that's the reason why he is still now considered one of the most important people on the grid, and someone you definitely want in your team. Newey fully designed the front wing and basically connected the front wing to the car, made the front wing as wide as the car was to give it better aerodynamics and better resistance and all this. and he made sure that wind was going underneath the car as well as over the top, and it just really was a massive change to what we had seen already in Formula 1. And not only that, he changed things like the driver's seating position. He was the one who brought in this look to drivers' seating, the way they're sort of leaned back and reclined in the seat. That was all him. That was all his change and what he wanted to do with it, which is, really, I think, awesome. You don't see that all too often. Someone deciding, what will really affect the pace of this car is if the driver was leaned back a bit. No one else would have thought of that, and it just somehow worked. I mean, he's just such a genius. And of course, one of his biggest things he ever did was at Williams in 1992 when he created the active suspension. It was quite controversial at the time and still is to some people. They say it's cheating, it's not actual racing. Obviously the active suspension was able to change at the press of a button. So when you press the button, it would change the rear, angle it downwards so that it had better speed and less drag on the straights, which is an insane design, but definitely improved performance. And of course, when Newey moved to McLaren, he also decided to move the diffuser to the back of the car in between the rear wheels, behind the rear wheels. And that was another huge change. And it's these things, it's to have that creative mind almost, to look at the regulations, look at the rules and say, right, where can we make these little changes? It's all well and good being able to say, oh yeah, let's build the design that Newey's done, right? But to be that person, to be Adrian Newey, is something special because he just has this ability to find different pockets of improvement and what he can change, which completely changes the way the car runs. And that's why he's now at Aston Martin on, a huge wage, because he can take that Aston Martin team from where they are now to potential title challenges. And with the amount of money that they have, Honda coming in 2026, hopefully getting rid of Lance Stroll, they'll be absolutely incredible. I can already tell. He's just that sort of person. He can have that effect on a team, and that's the reason, of course, as well, that he's gone on to win 12 constructors and 13 drivers titles, with 532 podiums and 220 Grand Prix wins. And that's because he is an absolute genius at aerodynamics. And undoubtedly, Alonso will get another win. Will he get another championship? I'm not too sure, but I mean, he's definitely going to have such a massive effect on that team, and I can't wait to see it. One of the biggest changes that we ever saw in Formula 1 was the introduction of DRS, the drag reduction system. Basically, DRS is when on certain parts of the track, the rear wing flaps open to allow more air through, reducing drag and increasing your top speed when you're within a second of the car ahead, allowing you to get an overtake done, or at least catch up as much as possible. Usually now in Formula 1, your best bet is to be 3/10 probably behind the car in front on most tracks to be able to get that move done. And the fact that you could just make up 3/10 in one straight is something incredible. And going back to Adrian Newey, he was the one who basically has mastered DRS. The way that Red Bull was in 2023 and at the start of this season, so unbelievably dominant in DRS zones. That's the Newey effect for you. He can just make the most out of anything. DRS over time has become quite a controversial topic. Some people love it. They think it really improves the racing and makes it a lot more exciting, especially those, I think, who watched Formula 1 in 2010. Some people think it sort of ruins it. They say it's too technology based, it's not actual racing, it's better just sort of being in the slipstream. And I think both sides have a point. Some people just don't care. However, I do think it definitely improves the excitement of racing. At the same time, when Red Bull were completely dominating, it did make it extremely boring because no one else had a chance when they got into DRS. Now, looking at when DRS was introduced in 2011, if we go back to 2010 first, there were 23.8 overtakes per race, as you could see. This is on an average, so some had more than others, of course, like every track. But then in 2011, that went up massively to 65.7 on average, which is an absolutely huge jump. And of course, it has been a major factor in some certain huge moments in Formula One. You know, people use the DRS to their advantage whenever they possibly can. And I think it has become, for Formula One, it has become a bit too reliant on DRS. You very rarely see overtakes outside of DRS, you know, other than when it's raining. And when it does rain, you rarely do see many overtakes, you know, if any. In 2023, we now see a bit of a fall off, I guess, only 50 overtakes on average, and that number is heavily boosted by Las Vegas. So we've definitely seen a downturn in DRS, and that's why, of course, in 2026, we're seeing new regulations being brought in terms of, you know, the DRS type and something that will massively affect aerodynamics. So we now have X and Z modes, or Z modes, whatever you want to call it, coming into Formula One. So not only with this, the front wing will now be 100 millimeters narrower and have a 2-element flap. So Z mode, which is very similar to DRS, is where the elements on both the front and the rear wings will open and be angled to deliver greater cornering speeds. So this is through certain corners on the tracks, you will see the rear and the front wings open to give better cornering speeds and allow you to catch up more with the car ahead. Of course, this is driver activated. Now, X mode is also new, and this is the low drag configuration that sees the flap angle change on both once again, but this is on straights. So this is to give you more straight line speed. Now, I don't think this is replacing DRS. I think this is specifically when you're outside the 1 second zone, you will be able to use this to sort of give yourself a boost. And once again, it's sort of another reason why F1 is going more technology based. You know, it's going this way, and we can't really stop it, because eventually we will probably end up with electric cars in Formula One, because that's just the way it's going. You know, Formula E is doing fine. You know, they want to be more environmental, they want to get to net zero, all this sort of stuff. So we are going that way, and we are going to see this sort of stuff come in. How good it's going to be, I'm not sure. I think there's still certain safety regs that I think should be looked at in terms of going around corners. Maybe it won't be activated if it's too windy. That might become a part of it. You know, it's too windy, we can't activate Z mode. Absolutely hate those names as well. Z and X mode, I'm not a fan of. You know, we need DRS, ERS. It needs to be something to do with that. If you've got an idea, let me know in the comments on what you'd like it to be called. But yeah, that is pretty much it in terms of what we're seeing massively affecting aero next year. And yeah, what do you think of these changes? I think they're quite interesting. Like I said, I'm not a massive fan of the names. I reckon they'll be absolutely fine for racing. It'll probably make it more interesting. You'll see teams using their Z and X mode to try and catch up, and that might give you an idea when people are attacking or something like that. But looking back on the video, so aerodynamics had its big sort of revolution when Colin Chapman brought in the wings with Lotus, and they started to, or everyone started to get in on the aerodynamics trend. And then the biggest part of history in it is pretty much just Adrian Newey. It's pretty much just autobiography from there. Every change he made has had massive effects, and without a doubt, he is the king of aero. He has had such a profound effect on the sport. He's brought in so many different ideas and, you know, different things that have changed the regulations. They've created world champions, and he is just an absolute legend. I'd recommend you go read his book. Very interesting, and certainly will give you a better understanding of aerodynamics if you're looking at the more technical side of it. But more than that, I hope you've enjoyed this video. A little bit different in structure in terms of not going through the decades, but there really isn't a lot to go through. It's basically just, hey, Adrian Newey did this, hey, Adrian Newey did that. So we didn't look at that too much. But a little bit on DRS here. I might do another video talking properly about DRS and ERS and these sort of things. But for now, I'll leave it here. Let me know if you want to see a full video breaking that down and what effect it's had. But you can kind of see what effect it's had. You know, it's definitely a lot more overtakes, but does it make racing boring? That is the big question. We don't see a lot of overtakes outside of DRS, like I said. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you had, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any part of the F1 history series that we're doing. I hope you have a great day, evening, morning, whatever it is you are doing right now, whatever time it is. And I will see you all in the next one.